renders us ripe for extinguishing ourselves as a form of life. In other words, we run the risk of being the first natural form of life to be directly responsible for its undoing. Even the dodo bird needed some help to obliterate itself. We may not. Well, how do we understand this, and how do we understand this in ways that may render us in somewhat of a position to do something about it? And here's where we believe that the ideas of Ernest Becker are especially pertinent, as some of you already know, and as I hope to convince others of you this evening. Ernest Becker was a cultural anthropologist who existed, Neil, correct me if I get the dates wrong, or Dan, anybody, 1924 until 1973, 4. Becker, 24 to 73, cultural anthropologist. Spent a substantial proportion of his professional life trying to understand the psychological basis of human evil. And what I'd like to do very simply, just to set the tone for the program that we are hopefully about to experience collectively in the days to come, is to just provide a working overview of the core constructs that informed his understanding of the basic nature of the human animal. What Becker said, and this is one of the things that appealed to my buddies Jeff Greenberg and Tom Pazinski and I when we first encountered Becker's work, was that if we want to understand human evil, we have to back up a bit. And the first thing that we need to do is to understand what it is that motivates human behavior in general. And one of the things that I always liked about Becker's ideas is that he had a spectacular knack for expressing them in ways that avoided jargon and that just very clearly said what it is that he had in mind. So when Becker talks about human motivation, he's really asking the question, why is it that people do what they do when they do it? And so Becker says, let's try and figure out what it is that impels people to behave as they do. But before he gets too far with regard to his conceptual analysis, he backs up in the Structure of Evil book that I borrowed as part of this title, and he says, let's just talk about some epistemological kinds of questions. That makes people nervous in my undergraduate classes. They always say, I have no interest in urinary tract disorders, and so why do we have to take this kind of detour at this point? I'm all right, I picked the wrong word. Let me back up a bit, because the philosophical types, I know we're at an erudite university, so I know the students here are familiar with epistemology. That's just the study of how it is that we acquire knowledge. And Becker said, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go through the ground rules. What are the presumptions that we're going to make before we theorize? And he has 4 of them. And again, as we totter into middle age, maybe beyond middle age, into early old age, when Tom and Jeff and I think about these things, I think this is one of the reasons why we were so attracted to these ideas to begin with. The first thing that Becker says is, look, any attempt to understand the motivational underpinnings of human behavior must be done from an interdisciplinary perspective. Long before it was fashionable to do so, Becker insisted that no single discipline has a lock on the truth, and that therefore we need to be able to be willing to entertain ideas from every discipline, academic and otherwise. So of course, as an anthropologist, he was interested in anthropology, but he also said we've got to look at things from a biological point of view. We've got to look at things from a psychological point of view, from a sociological point of view, from a philosophical point of view, a historical point of view, a literary point of view. We've got to look at popular culture. There's no place from which it is inconceivable that a good idea might come from, and we need to be willing to entertain them all. And he was indeed a rather really all-embracing scholar, well-versed in lots of disciplines. And I think one of the reasons why his analysis of human behavior is so potent, it was then and is now, is because he literally takes the best ideas that have been kicking around Western and even Eastern thought for many, many centuries and presents them to us in a way that is engaging and just amenable to our own understanding and hopefully reactions to it. So that's thing one, is that these ideas should be interdisciplinary in nature. The second thing that Becker argues, or his second epistemological assumption, if I can get technical on you for a moment, is the idea that if we're going to get anywhere in terms of understanding human behavior, we need to go about it in an empirical or scientific fashion. On the one hand, Becker said, look, every idea should be considered. Everybody's got a right to an opinion, but not all opinions are created equal. In other words, for Becker, you have a right to be wrong. Who's familiar with postmodern thought? Anybody know the postmodern types? I don't have time to argue with you today, and I don't know where you stand on this issue, but it's currently fashionable in academic circles to insist that any idea is as good as another. So a brain surgeon is no better or worse than someone who reads the entrails of dead animals in order to predict the weather. Well, I disagree, and so would Becker. Becker's claim was that ideas that are apt to be powerful, and I want to avoid the word truth so we can dodge the issue of what it means when you declare an idea to be true. Becker's point very simply is that, historically speaking, the most powerful and enduring ideas are ones that can be subjected to empirical scrutiny. And while Becker himself never went out and tested his ideas directly, that's one of the things that Jeff and Tom and I have done, along with a host of other folks, some of whom you'll meet this weekend. And we think it's important to note that just about every one of the ideas that comes from Becker that we have subjected to empirical scrutiny has held up quite nicely. So that's the second point, is that all things being equal, ideas that are subjectable to empirical scrutiny will fare better than those that are framed in ways that do not allow that to occur. Becker's third insistent notion that I find particularly and poignantly relevant to our collective concerns in the context of this meeting, it comes from his really unabashed commitment to both the Enlightenment tradition as well as the pragmatic tradition of the American philosophers of the 20th century. Becker really did believe, and maybe a little smattering of having grown up or existed in the 1960s, in the hippie days. As many of you know, the Enlightenment tradition, those were heady times, because the idea was that human beings could rationally try to understand the world around them, and they can use what they learn in an effort to modify both themselves and the world around them to make the world a better place. That sounds like Walt Disney to some these days, and yet Becker took that idea quite seriously. He was not a big fan of the stodgy academic notion that one acquires knowledge for the sake of knowledge per se, but again, rather following the pragmatic philosophers like Peirce and Dewey. He insisted that knowledge is only useful to the extent that it informs action, either personally or at the more broad social level. Finally, Becker said that we will fare much better with our theories about human behavior if we ground them very solidly in the context of Darwin's ideas vis-a-vis the theory of evolution. Again, I'll spare you a longer tirade just to avoid getting hung up here. But the point that Becker makes is that Darwin's theory of evolution, whether it's, quote, absolutely true or not, is without a doubt the most potent and enduring theory in the history of science. It's been here for quite a long time. It's yet to be disconfirmed. It has led to stunning predictions about the nature of reality that have proven to be true. And therefore, it would behoove us to frame our theoretical conceptions about human motivation in the context of what Darwin had to say. All right, with that in mind, let's launch very quickly into Becker's understanding of the basic motivational underpinnings of human behavior, and then let's see how that helps us understand the kind of vicious human behavior that I insist has characterized the history of humankind to date. And then let's very briefly ponder whether or not that analysis may help us move in